All right, good afternoon, everyone. What we're going to be talking about today is it's a quick online Quizlet that we developed with CyberArk, one of our partners, that walks you through, I think it's like 10 questions or so, to essentially gauge where you at in your PAM program today, right? There's a lot of questions, or I shouldn't say a lot, but there's questions in there that I think are where the PAM market is going, which is interesting and what I want to talk about. This is interactive, so I'm going to bring up the QR code in a second. Go ahead and scan it. Let's go through it and have some fun. And then we can call out scores at the end and talk through what those scores really mean. All right? Let's see if this works. All right. So my name is Nick Hunt. I'm the Director of Delivery for IDMWORKS. We developed this with CyberArk. From an agenda today, why is PAM critical? Everyone knows what PAM is, right? Show of hands. Everyone good? We know what PAM. All right. What is the PAM maturity model? Kind of a quick overview. And then we're going to have some fun, go through the report. Let's call out some numbers, see where everyone's at, okay? So everyone got the... Not yet? Okay. All right. So why is PAM critical? It's discovering, number one, and protecting the keys to your kingdom. I mean, that's the loose answer, kind of the Wikipedia definition of PAM, right? But the interesting thing about PAM, and from a maturity perspective, right, what we're going to be talking about today, is how we define privilege. PAM is privileged access management, right? But the key to it, and probably one of the harder parts of communicating and selling PAM programs, right, to our leadership, is it isn't the cool whiz-bang kind of front end that everyone sees and uses and everything else, right? It's traditionally thought of check in, check out, kind of a back-end infrastructure process, right? And where we need to change the narrative a little bit to essentially make it mainstream is change that definition of privileged access management, but define what privilege is. And then how is that supporting the access management? So the example I like to give when I'm talking to people is you having a credential, you having access to your network, you having access to an application is a privilege. Everyone assumes it's an elevated right, but what is elevated, right? It's in the eyes of the beholder. That's going to be a subjective question. There's the obvious answers of root, domain admins, super user credentials, everything else. But at the same time, in the current climate, having access to an application could be a privilege, right? Not even elevated anything else. Being connected to a network could be a privilege, right? So we need to take a step back for a second when we're looking at PAM programs and not only define what the kind of industry, whether it be insurance, was it the New York DFS standard that is requiring PAM now? There's a number of regulations and cyber insurance requirements. And the question always is, do you have PAM, right? Well, we need to redefine that a little bit, right? It will pay a lot of dividends from an overall security improvement, right? And also pay a lot of dividends just from getting it into your environment, right? So, brief history about PAM. Oddly enough, I did CyberArk, I want to say 2005, 2006, when it was still kind of fairly early and, bit of a challenge to get up and going, right? And everything was strictly focused on discovering, check in, check out. That's it, right? And that's what I think a lot of people start out their PAM programs with is the general kind of key password, service account rotation and management and everything else, but very quickly this is evolving into usage of those credentials, access to those credentials, access to targets that those credentials are used in, right? So when we start talking about secure web browsers, proxies, bastion hosts, different stuff like that, as well as the whole development side of the world, that definition of PAM really starts getting fluid, right? So over time we've got discovery and vaulting. Session management kind of came right after that. It's like, hey, this is really cool. We can check these things out. Now let's watch and kind of record what's going on and start restricting that usage. Then you got the DevSecOps and application secrets and that whole arena that came about. And the really fun one anymore is privilege creation, right? The concepts of zero standing privilege, just-in-time privilege, everything else that is largely challenging at this point, right? Because not every application defines privilege and entitlements the same. So it's hard to define a standard to say, hey, we're going to create a privilege or assign a privilege just in time, right? It's really going to be targeted at specific applications and use cases, right? And then what's next? I was talking to someone up front earlier, and depending on the camp you're in, what's next is discovery and vaulting could go away, right? There's argument to say that's an identity governance function, right? Like, why are we creating and rotating passwords? Let's focus on the privilege itself and the access in the environment. So let's get started. Everyone's gone, click through it. Privately, you can type a bogus email. I know it prompts you for your email, but yeah. From an overall results, it's a pretty simple scale. This is consistent across all of our advisory we do at IDMWORKS, but it's a 5-point scale. 0 to 1, you've got nothing in place today, right? You need to act on it. 1 to 2 would be developing, 2 to 3 define, kind of that incremental improvement. And depending on, what capabilities you have from the PAM program, that scale will start sliding a little bit more. All right. So let's hear some scores. This is my score for home, by the way. I'm not very good. I run a data center in my basement, so I've got psychotic, so I've at least got basic discovery. But let's hear anyone that went through that wants to share their score, if it's okay. 1.5. Huh? 1.5? Yeah. There you go. You're in the, would it be? Yeah, developing stage. Yep. How about anyone else? 4.95. What? 1.95. 1.95, you're with me? Okay. 4.1. All right. Let's talk about your program for a second. If you don't mind me asking, this is, I'm trying to kind of gauge, kind of share a little bit in here, like that 4 plus, imagine you've got all the account discovery session, secrets, the whole shebang?
Between several internal teams, yeah.
Okay. Have you guys centralized on a product or a set of products to do that?
So we use a few different tools for monitoring and then also for privilege access, like Privilege Identity Manager.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually transitioning right now from one product to another.
Okay.
But yeah, we limit access to privileged accounts by groups and things like that. And set up schedules, and we have policies in place. We have to rotate certain passwords based on what is being accessed, certain elements.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very locked down, and we have alerting for when these accounts are used, places that they are not supposed to be in.
This is a common question I get asked, and I'm going to ask you. How did you get buy-in from the actual consumers of those secrets and identities to check in? Like your comment of it being very locked down, the biggest question I get in pushback, just as a general kind of conversation, right, is it's difficult. I can't get this. Why are we locking these things down? How did you guys overcome that?
We didn't give them a choice. We either have to get everything in line, or basically not going to have access to that anymore. So.
Okay, that's good. Makes it easier. Anyone else?
Support to drive it. Otherwise, get all the pushback, get no's.
Mm-hmm. Executive support's big for me. You got to have that executive that can stand behind you and say, yes, we are doing this. I'm an old school network nerd, Windows operations and stuff. Oddly enough, I started doing development, then went into operations and security. Now I'm back into development. But one of the things I'm always an advocate of is, yes, have the stick, the executive, but also meet people where they work, right? So we talk about session, proxying, everything else. Most of the major products out there have some kind of connection manager, broker that integrates with existing tools, right? So me as a Windows admin, or when I was doing Cisco networking, right, I'd fire up PuTTY or SSH client, whatever I'm using, or RDP, and I'm off to the races, right? So when I'm working with people, I'm like, all right, keep using that. Just add this one flag. That's all I'm asking, right? And now you're meeting them where they work, and they're adopting the platform.
Can I ask what industry he works in?
Yeah. Financial is probably one of the easier ones. There's usually a really big stick there. We talked healthcare. I recognize the face. That's a more challenging one. Education, really challenging.
We're higher ed and med center.
Yeah, that was my background. Is a medical center, pediatric medical center at that, and it was part of a university, so made it really interesting.
We got a 2.9.
Still good though. Like I said, I'm only at 195. But yeah, so the report, it will send you an email with the details and everything. What do you do with the report? It is a tool for us. We kind of communicate it to our customers just to gauge where people are at, help identify opportunities, so to speak, right, to improve your own programs. But looking at the report that comes out, the big things for me is based on your score and where you want to be, start defining that gap, right? I'm at 195, right? I want to be at 4, so to speak, right? What's it going to take to get there? Define that end state, and then start working backwards and say, all right, incrementally, here's improvements I can make or decisions I can start making now to get me to that end state and lay it out, right? I think I mentioned PAM is hard to sell, right? It's not very visible. But what makes it easier to sell is starting to put a business justification around it. Like, hey, we're going to meet these requirements. We're going to lower our cyber insurance. We're going to incrementally reduce our risk, in these areas, and basically lay that out in the roadmap, right? Don't go it alone. I talk to a lot of people, not even from a sales perspective, just general guidance. These conferences, everything else. Catch us. We've done it, a number of times, and I may have come across something you haven't. Definitely share ideas, ask questions. You don't have to go it alone. So a lot of times when I find people go it alone, I hate saying it that way, but kind of do it themselves. They may get the initial release out, right, but they've missed gaps or didn't kind of configure discoveries correctly, right, and you're going to kind of run into issues. So definitely reach out. And that's it from this. Any questions? Pam, I can talk for hours on this stuff. Ask me.
You talked about going it alone, and what I find when I talk to other people is, depending on their this goes back to executive support again, the amount of funding that they get to build out a team. Sometimes they're really on a shoestring budget, and so that makes it very difficult for them to do to have a mature PAM program. They might do, like you said, they might just start with the basics of local administrators and things like that, and they never get any further than that to build out their maturity because they don't have the budget to do that. Do you have any suggestions of what should they look for? How do they
So
take the next step?
Owens will make fun of me here, but I'm a pie in the sky idea. Like, love visions. I like ideating, thinking out of the box and everything, right? So I always start with that end state, right? Paint the picture first. Don't throw the numbers out, right? So end state, we want to have, X, Y, and Z, and here's what the experience is going to be, and here's what it's going to do to our overall risk posture and everything else. But we can only afford this today, and do those incremental improvements. Get buy-in up front for the vision, so that next year, you may start with X. Next year when you say, well, we really need Y and Z now, they're saying, well, I already gave you X. Like, point at Z and start with X. That way you can actually lay it out over a multi-year kind of budget. So PAM specifically in service accounts. Let's kind of look at that for a minute, right? Arguably, service account creation, management, request, everything else, in my opinion, is a governance problem, right? We've got identity provisioning tools, request processes, workflows, ownership reviews, all that type of stuff, right? So that should all be a governance function. Who can request them, who owns them, everything else. Now, as soon as that is created and it hits a target, whether it's Active Directory, database, application, whatever it may be, PAM picks it up and starts enforcing at that point, right? So from an overall PAM perspective, right, now usage, enforcement, access is all for that service account is controlled within that platform. And we're just talking accounts at this point, right? That's kind of a static entity. You can start looking at secrets, for doing deployments. That could be a near real-time function, right? So I'm spinning up a build. It needs something to go do work, those types of things. So that's kind of a newer area. The just-in-time privilege that we're talking about right now, like, hey, everyone has no privileges on servers other than login. You need to do something, you request it, and it happens right there, right? Those types of things are where the PAM is going. But the initial account creation kind of management, in my opinion, is moving more of an identity governance. The enforcement is where PAM starts coming into play.
So is there a particular
Yeah.
Is there a particular tool that you would suggest in a particular company to say, within governance of, let's say, a service account itself?
It really depends on existing agreements, resources. I mean, obviously, Savient has their PAM module. SailPoint has their PAM integration. I mean, there's a number of products out there that you could build those capabilities. Now, if you're talking actual PAM product, kind of that next phase, it's going to come down to kind of two schools of thought. Are you a platform, right? Do you want kind of the ultra wide that accounts for 85% of your use cases, or 80% and does it okay or good enough, right? Or do you want kind of point, best of breed type of products for different use cases? It can come down to your overall architecture, right? When you start talking cloud and secrets and everything else, there's a couple of schools of thought. There's more of a push and monitor versus a general accessibility, right? The push model being, hey, I'll generate a secret and push it to AWS or Azure or whatever it may be, and you use it natively over there. I'm just going to watch it, right? Versus, hey, I'm going to generate this secret and give you an integration to come get it from me, right? So it's kind of a hard question. Me personally, I'm a platform person, so I look at the bigger stacks that can check all the boxes for me, and I can go to one person and say, hey, I'm having a problem. Can you fix it? But I also understand the, developers like their tool, from the secrets, or different groups like different things, right?
So from a platform perspective, you had a business, you're known a business, what would you suggest?
I mean, I'd go after the mainstays at this point. CyberArk, Delinea. There's a vendor out here I'm trying to meet called, was it ACOM? Archon, that's it. They're getting really good reviews. I just haven't had an opportunity to mess around with them yet. Beyond Trust, I mean, the major players are out there. You start looking at kind of some of the point stuff, you're going to be looking at like the strong DMs and other kind of add-on or point solution specific products. I mean, it really comes down to how far you want to take it. I think everyone starts out with kind of the main vaulting and then starts going from there. But to answer your question, or go back to your question earlier, if you know you're going to be doing secrets or you want to do deep app integration or just-in-time privilege, you may start with just the vaulting of a CyberArk, right? But no, you've got the Conjure and all the other, what are they calling Conjure now? For CyberArk, is it App Security Manager? App Secrets? Yeah, the Conjure stuff. But whatever CyberArk is calling it from a branding. But you may start there and say, these are our year 2 and 3 plans, and we just did it with someone finished about a year ago, and it was like a 3-year project. We started with vaulting getting off of CA, which is what they were using. We started with the initial vaulting, and then we added in the Conjure, and they've been going for a while now. But it was a 3-year budget, like we planned well ahead of time.
What are your thoughts on the convergence of the IGA capabilities and the PAM product? You touched on it, but where do you think that Venn diagram is today? And what do you think each side is going to start eating into the other one in terms of features?
So the handoff to me between the converged features, it's going to be enforcement and usage, right? General mastering, creation, I was going to say the governance, the process around creating, from request to provision. Governance should own that. They're good at it, right? And there's plenty of integrations from the targets and everything else, right, to go out and do that work. But as soon as it's created and handed off and it's actually usable, PAM needs to step in at that point and start the enforcement side of that equation, right? Who can use it, where they can use it from, how I'm going to rotate it, all the other good stuff. The process of the account, the periodic certifications and attestations, all the other stuff should remain in a governance platform.
What about specifically the just-in-time you were talking about, where you've got your named account that you're having the elevated privilege for fixed start and end times, like something like Entra, privileged identity management? We've got customers that's eating into the traditional CyberArk deployments in terms of shifting some of that stuff over. Do you see that continuing as a trend? Or?
Yep. Azure and PIM specifically, that's going to eat into a lot of your traditional ideas of PAM concepts, right? But not everyone follows that same model. If you're a big Azure shop, yeah, of course. But you go to other cloud providers, GCP, Oracle, AWS, they don't do the same thing. So it really depends on your target. But you can also look at other vendors in the space, like a Safeguard, by One Identity, that is built and runs on Azure and integrates pretty quickly with the PIM stuff from a general policy, enforcement, accessibility, everything else. So the other players might start following suit and doing the same thing.
Yeah, I guess the flip side is the IGA vendors are going to start doing vaulting, session recording, and some of those things, or they'll just leave it to the players. Totally speculative, I know that.
Oh no, I can see one vendor starting to get into it, and honestly, it's CyberArk, right? With the adaptive purchase and the identity security and everything else they're building in, and some of the loose governance from a provisioning of account perspective, I could see CyberArk getting into it, honestly. Others, I don't see a Savient, SailPoint getting into like the session recording and all the other. Exactly.
Tools like Okta adding PAM features to their stack, but that's not their traditional space either. So I do see some of that where they're converging.
Probably more likely to just buy the module, like just buy the different company that does it and merge it into their.
But Okta is a good example of how do you define PAM, because the Okta model is more ephemeral token type of privilege access, right? I need access to a server. I need to get into something. You're using your Okta credential and it's creating virtual sessions, essentially in targets, right? They've got traditional vaulting capabilities, but for the most part, they're focused on the token, right? And granting that access to a target, not so much the account itself, right? So that could shift things, and they do the basic account creation in Okta with their provisioning, right? But at the same time, they want to control the access. I'm actually out of time. They were giving me the high sign a minute ago. So, but stick around, catch me. I love talking this stuff.
Thank you.
So, thanks.